Hello! Welcome to this, the third video in this series where I'm running through all of the starships that appear on screen chronologically in the Star Wars films. This time, Return of the Jedi, of course. As before, this video will only be covering the first appearance of new or unique ships that appear in the film. For any ships that made their first appearance in the previous films, check out my other videos on A New Hope and Empire via the links in the description. And the usual canon disclaimer applies. The canonical status of any of the upcoming information is ever changing, especially since Disney hit the button that rebooted the expanded universe. The big button marked Star Wars Legends. And I've been using the special edition versions of the films because more ships than that. Also, in addition to starships, I've been giving brief honourable nods to the worthy repulsorcraft that pop up from time to time. Okay, without further ado, let's do it. This time round we actually have an honourable mention before the main list, the Death Star 2 we see here. Although equipped with both ion engines and a hyperdrive, I'm not going to class it as a starship as it's more of a space station or orbital station. Okay, let's do it for real this time. Number 1. A LAMBDA-CLASS T-4A shuttle with the designation ST-321. This specific shuttle is the one we see throughout the film wherever Vader and the Emperor are concerned, and it's the starship Luke uses to escape the exploding Death Star at the end of the film. As I've covered the LAMBDA-CLASS shuttle fairly in depth in the previous video for starships that appear in The Empire Strikes Back, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. It could very well be the same shuttle as it's associated with Vader, but I'm including it here in this video purely because it was given a designation for this film and is more prominent throughout the movie. It is also different from another LAMBDA shuttle we see our heroes flying later on in the film.
I don't know. Fly casual.
Anyway, a couple more honourable mentions before we move on. Here over the Northern Dune Sea we get the first look at Jabba's luxury sail barge, the Katana. This large repulsor craft was modified to suit the crime lord's needs and used when traversing the sands of Tatooine, no doubt making frequent trips out to the Great Pit of Carkoon for some fun execution digestion action. And another honourable mention before we move on, as the sail barge was often escorted by Bantha II cargo skiffs that we see here. These skiffs were mostly used to transport prisoners and guards alongside the barge, which usually carried some of Jabba's more trusted cartel associates. The Bantha skiffs were of course named after Tatooine's own woolly mammoths, the Banthas, which, for the record, can also technically be mounted as vehicles, but I'm not including them because they don't float. Number 2. The next new starship we get a look at in Return of the Jedi is an MC-80A Star Cruiser, namely Home 1. This Calamari capital ship served as the main Alliance headquarters after the Empire had destroyed Echo Base on Hoth a year earlier. Originally intended to provide a means of deep space exploration, it had been retrofitted for military service by the Rebel Alliance. Constructed by Mon Calamari shipyards, the cruiser was 1,200 metres long and featured triple strength shields on top of heavy hull plating that was able to resist relatively heavy bombardment. In addition to housing squadrons of fighters in its many internal hangars, it was also equipped with turbo lasers, ion cannons and tractor beam projectors, and a Class 1 hyperdrive, making it the largest and most advanced ship in the Alliance fleet. If all that wasn't awesome enough, it also has an artificial lake at the centre, but I suppose it being a Mon Calamari ship this actually makes sense. At least 7 of the ships were known to have been used by the rebels and began military service in the early period of the Galactic Civil War, sometime prior to the Battle of Yavin. We also see a number of CR-90 corvettes and Nebulon frigates making up this part of the rebel fleet here as well. Number 3. In this same shot we get the first glimpse of another very similar Mon Cal ship, an MC-80 Liberty-class star cruiser called the Liberty. This variant of the primary Home 1 class cruiser had a wing-shaped superstructure affixed on either side of the main hull, and like its many counterparts, was internally standardised as much as possible to accommodate the non-Mon Calamari crew members. For example, the cruiser housed Corona Squadron, a group of X-Wings used primarily for reconnaissance duty. Said squadron did go on to serve during the final battle of the film, but it's impossible to say if they're seen on screen or not. But, given the breadth of the battle, we can pretend that they do. Like, is this them? Oh, what about these guys? Who knows, but they get a shout out all the same. The Liberty would go on to participate in the decisive Battle of Endor, where it would fall victim to the second Death Star's newly, and surprisingly operational super laser. Number 4. A LAMBDA-CLASS shuttle named TYDIRIUM. As previously mentioned, this ship class has appeared a few times in the series by this point, but this one in particular is a different ship. The Rebel Alliance came into possession of the TYDIRIUM after it was stolen from the Empire by Nien Nunb during a diversion mission leading up to the Battle of Endor. The TYDIRIUM was utilised as an escape vessel during the turbulent closing moments of the mission. The TYDIRIUM would then be used by the Alliance to infiltrate the Empire's occupation of Endor. Using the shuttle's Imperial clearance codes, they were able to bypass the moon's blockade and ferry a strike team down to the surface of the moon, where they would proceed to deactivate the deflector shield generator being used to protect the orbiting Death Star. In the old expanded universe, the TYDIRIUM would later be used by Han Solo to infiltrate the Class 1 Star Destroyer Accuser and hijack the warship, eventually bringing it into the Alliance fleet under the new name Emancipator. The TYDIRIUM would go on to serve the Rebels for years to come, undergoing several refittings and modifications. Number 5. Next up we get our first look at an RZ-1 A-Wing Interceptor. Manufactured by Kuat Systems Engineering, this starfighter was fast and agile with an array of impressive specifications. Coming in at just under 10 meters in length, the tiny ship possessed a J-77 Event Horizon sublight drive unit. This allowed this particular starfighter to travel up to 1300 km an hour and attain improved manoeuvrability through the use of adjustable thrust vector controls. The unfortunate downside of such capabilities was a difficulty in regaining stable flight after performing advanced manoeuvres. Because of these potential drawbacks, pilots that volunteered to fly A-Wings often had a reputation of being either crazy or brave, or both. The A-Wing was also fitted with high-end Class 1 hyperdrive courtesy of Incom. It came equipped with a shield generator, 2 Borstal RG-9 laser cannons and 2 missile launchers that each carried 6 concussion missiles. The Rebel Alliance first acquired their A-Wings following the Battle of Yavin and saw their first action right away, staving off an Imperial ambush in the Ison Corridor, a trade route the Rebels were using to head Corward in search of a new base. Afterwards, the A-Wings were quickly employed by Rogue Squadron in many of their early operations, such as a raid on Bespin and a strike at Destrillion, where they were piloted by Rogue leader Wedge Antilles himself. Number 6. Next up, the ASF-01 B-Wing Starfighter. One of my favourites, going back to the Rebel Assault 2 days. The B-Wing, or Blade Wing Starfighter, more on the name in a moment, was developed by Slane & Corpil, a manufacturer operated by the Verpine race. The specific design was then vastly improved upon by a Mon Calamari named Quarry, who constructed a prototype in isolation on the remote planet Ashantipol. This prototype, named the B6, wasn't identical to the fighters we see in this film. For example, the B6 had a gunner's turret situated at the tail end, but it was the basis for all subsequent designs, that being to deliver a lot of diverse firepower within a very narrow, very agile starfighter. Designed primarily as a blockade buster, the ship was highly configurable, possessing modular hardpoints that made the ship extremely situation adaptable. The most notable, distinctive, and just plain coolest feature of the ship, beside the S-foils and 90-degree rotating hull, was the gyro-stabilizing cockpit module, which rotated independently. This allowed pilots to coordinate advanced maneuvers, and much like the A-Wing, it took a special kind of pilot to volunteer. The Heavy Assault Starfighter was one of the biggest in the Rebel fleet, primarily affixed with numerous ion cannons, twin auto blasters, a heavy laser cannon, and MG-9 proton torpedo launchers. To assist with combat, the ship also contained an advanced sensor system and targeting computer directly connected to its armaments. This meant that pilots could coordinate precision strikes with assistance from low-power targeting lasers, presumably when pulling off badass crazy maneuvers in this badass crazy starfighter. Okay, before moving on and pulling back from the fiction for a second, I believe the naming convention for the A and B wing have a lot of basis purely in the production process, i.e. Ship A and Ship B. And in light of the X and Y wing designs from the previous film, it makes sense to try and incorporate the letter shape into the visual designs. This is of course easier to see when it comes to the A wing, the B wing less so. There is some speculation that the ship can and does resemble a B shape, but I don't really buy it. Lowercase? Furthermore, there's also a story that the ILM staff referred to the B-Wing as such in honour of visual effects artist Bill George, who had significant input into the ship's design. Moving on, honourable mention time. The 74Z speeder bike shows up here on the Sanctuary Moon. These speeder bikes were utilised by the Galactic Empire for rapid transportation inside combat zones. Much like swoop bikes, they essentially consisted of the minimum amount of machinery necessary to function in order to increase their speed, which was around 500 km an hour at maximum. Not much more than a primary engine and somewhere to sit, they were fitted with blaster cannons at the front, small cargo satchels at the rear, and primarily ridden by specialised scout troopers. Number 7. Next, a brief glimpse at a BRAHA'TOK-CLASS gunship flying alongside the Home 1 here. Constructed by the Dornian Navy to defend their homeworld against Imperial military attacks, they were unseen outside the Dornian system for many years before joining the rebellion. The Dornian gunship was host to an incredible amount of weaponry, enough to be known as an anti-starship vessel, one that specialised in bombardments. Okay, behind the scenes time, and I try to avoid going out of the universe as much as possible in these videos, but I just can't help it when stuff gets interesting. Like this, besides a brief bit of history around the time of the early rebellion, not much else is detailed about this ship, and it's primarily because this ship didn't have a history until fairly recently. It puts me in mind of what I mentioned at the end of the last video, when I was pointing out those unnamed ships scattered around the rebel fleet at the end. For the Dornian gunship we see here in Jedi was such a ship, for decades, before eventually being identified and elaborated on in the newer stories, and then retroactively bearing the name in classifications. Originally, this obscure ship was just referred to as ROJBG ship, Return of the Jedi background ship, or Bill George ship. It was ultimately decided by Joe Johnston that it looked a little too Galactica and was subsequently given a tiny role in the final film. Since acquiring official status as the Dornian gunship, it has turned up in animated form in an episode of Star Wars Rebels, and as a photorealistic model in the final battle of Rogue One. Pretty cool. Okay, back to it. Number 8. During the final battle here, we get our first look at a TIE Interceptor, identifiable by the unmistakable appearance of its spike-like wings. Like many of the other TIE models, it was manufactured by Scianar Fleet Systems, and although still lacking heavy armour, deflector shields, life support or a hyperdrive as standard, the fighter was an improvement on previous designs in a few key areas. Most of the upgrades came in the form of an improved armament and the need to counter the weapons capabilities of Rebel X-Wings. The Interceptor was also one of the fastest starfighters ever created, thanks to upgraded ion engines, becoming the Empire's alternative to the A-Wing Interceptor in terms of manoeuvrability. Another developmental factor was to create a fighter with the power of the TIE Advanced, which had proved to be a solid rival to the Incom X-Wing during the Battle of Yavin. The goal being to take design elements from the Advanced but make the Interceptor much more cost effective to produce. With this in mind, the Interceptor being given a folded wing shape akin to the TIE Advanced, the bent shape and lengthened design gave the solar arrays an increased surface area which provided more power to the various upgraded systems. Because of this, it was also much narrower in profile, which made it a harder target for enemy pilots and gunners to hit. This combined with the increased manoeuvrability, speed and firepower made the Interceptor a formidable foe, especially given that by the time of the Battle of Endor they made up 20% of the Imperial starfighter complement, with an aim to replace every TIE with the Interceptor model. The fact that it looked like a scary claw coming at you in the dark was also a bonus. Number 9. Another MC-80A star cruiser named the Nautilian. There isn't much to say about this poor ship. Almost identical to Home 1 in terms of specifications, its defining feature, in the film at least, is getting annihilated by the second Death Star's super laser. Number 10. Next up, the introduction of a TECTOR-CLASS Star Destroyer, namely the Harbinger. This class of vessel was similar to the conventional Class 1 and 2 destroyers, but had ditched the ventral hangar bays in favour of a substantial increase in armour, as seen here in this shot of the underside. Due to this design, the hull was thicker throughout many sections of the ship, as hollow space that housed the hangar bays on the other models was covered or filled entirely. The reactor core also saw a boost in defence. On the plus side, this gave the ship an edge in ship-to-ship combat, as there was less external exposure to the internal weak spots. However, it also meant that this Star Destroyer required dedicated escort squadrons or carrier vessels if additional starfighter support was ever needed. 3 of these vessels were present during the Battle of Endor, but only the Harbinger ever appears on screen. It is, however, destroyed off-screen along with a large portion of the Imperial forces. Lastly, a sort of honourable mention, the Naboo N1 starfighter can be seen here in these added special edition shots. However, it wouldn't be fair on this beautiful ship to go into too much detail about it here, given its prominence in the next film. Yet, on that same note, this is technically the first time it appears chronologically in the series now, so I have to mention it. And a quick look at a Coruscant air taxi, how sweet it would be to just flag one down and go for a ride. So there you have it. All the starships and more that appear on screen in Return of the Jedi. Some parts of this one were definitely challenging. Classifying the features and whereabouts of the differing Mon Calamari cruisers in the Rebel flotilla can get very confusing, and is continuously debated. I've done my best, but it really is tricky once you start trying to pin down which one is which and when they appear first, in which scenes, in which shots in the film. There's also a lot of new content being retroactively added all the time, so that's another factor to consider. Oh well, it's all make-believe after all, right? So none of it really matters. I certainly don't care. Anyway, that wraps up my look at the starships that appear in the original trilogy. I'm not sure what to do next. Do I carry on this series and jump straight into the prequel trilogy, or do something else first? I gotta admit, the notion of covering the amount of stuff, starships, repulsorcraft, expanded universe details in the prequel trilogy, it looms over me like, well, like this. Thank you for watching, peace,